Gil. Good morning. Well, it's been said that the opportunity of a lifetime has to be seized within the lifetime of the opportunity. And I think maybe never has that been more true than right now in 2018 when the opportunity is great, but there's also opposition. And we know all of us here at Values Voter Summit have values that we care deeply about, but how do we actually put those values to action? What can we do about that? We have some very important elections coming up in just a month and a half. What exactly is at stake? How much is at stake? And then what is our role? What are some specific things that we can do to get involved and make an impact? That's what we'll be exploring on the panel this morning. The panel is made up of federal and state and local candidates, and I think they'll offer a unique variety of perspectives on these specific questions. The first panelist that I would like to introduce this morning is Elizabeth Schultz. Elizabeth is Fairfax County School Board member serving a second term on the board of the 10th largest school division in the nation. For her leadership, Elizabeth has received the first Stand Award at the National Awakening Conference and has also received the Courage in Leadership Award by the Virginia Christian Alliance for Integrity in Education Policy and for protecting students and parental rights while serving in public office. Please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Schultz. The second panelist I'd like to introduce is Dr. Mark Green. Mark is a physician, businessman, and veteran, and a state senator in Tennessee. He's a graduate of West Point and has served our nation in Iraq and Afghanistan and is a Bronze Star recipient as well as a recipient of the Air Medal with V device for valor under enemy fire. As an Army Special Operations flight surgeon, he planned to influence some of the War on Terror's most covert operations. His most memorable mission was the capture of Saddam Hussein, where he interviewed Saddam for 6 hours the night of his capture. Mark is also a current congressional candidate in Tennessee's 7th Congressional District. Please join me in welcoming Senator Mark Green. Next, we have Kayla Kessinger. Kayla is a member of the West Virginia House of Delegates. She was elected to her first term in the state legislature in 2014, just before her 22nd birthday. When elected, she was the 6th youngest state legislator in America. She is currently serving her second term in the state legislature and also serves as West Virginia's National Committee Woman on the RNC. Please join me in welcoming Kayla. And then lastly, we have Dr. Mark Harris. Mark is a husband, father, pastor, and community leader. He served as senior pastor at First Baptist Church, Charlotte, and was elected president of the North Carolina Baptist Convention from 2011 to 2013. Mark's tenure as president coincided with the ballot initiative in 2012 to define marriage in North Carolina as the union of one man and one woman. He helped mobilize the state's churches and is widely credited with playing a significant role in the marriage amendment's passage. Mark is running for Congress in North Carolina's 9th Congressional District. Please join me in welcoming him. All right, well, first question for the panelists. We have such a wide variety of backgrounds here. We also have federal, state, and local levels represented. And we want to hear, I'd love for you to hear their stories. What exactly was it that motivated them to take that step, to stand up for what they believe in and run for office? So, Elizabeth, could we start with you on that?
Certainly. You don't think that running for school board matters much, and I didn't much realize that Fairfax County was the 10th largest school system in the nation. What I was focused on was the fact that the school board prior to the one that I ran and won closed my child's local elementary school. And my community was so ired that where they lived, where they paid their taxes, they were no longer able to send their child to school, and that they were effectively bussed out, that they started submitting Freedom of Information Act requests. And the reality is that when I saw the perversion of the rule of law, when I saw the depriving of liberty of individual families to be able to send their children to their local public school, I was so ired. I was looking for somebody else to run, and finally the fingers started pointing back at me. And somebody said, you have to run. And I thought, somebody normal, somebody who believes in their community, who believes in liberty, who believes in parental rights and family rights, and that you should be able to go to your local school. That's where it all started. There was a lot more that came after that, but that kernel of truth that you've got to be able to be willing to serve and step into the gap when no one else will is what started it all.
Well, thanks for allowing me to be here, and thank you all for each of you being here. You know, you're in the trenches fighting for the values that have made this nation great, and I want to thank you for that. Brent mentioned that I got to fly on the mission with Saddam Hussein, and he asked me in the back if I would mention a little something about that, so I thought I'd go ahead and do that. When I was a part of those missions in Iraq, I was with our nation's most elite warriors. Our Tier 1 counterterrorism guys, if you saw the movie Black Hawk Down, that's who I got to be the physician for. It was an unbelievable experience. But it wasn't a fair fight. When we went to war, someone 10 to 15 years prior had built a military, had put an acquisitions pipeline together, resourced us with the best equipment, the best training, and it wasn't a fair fight. But over the past 8 years, or the years of the Barack Obama administration and sequestration, the military has suffered greatly. We're short 800 and something fighter pilots in the Air Force. We have brigade after brigade in the military, in the Army who is not ready, C1 ready, deployable. And the awareness of that has made me want to get involved in Washington and help rebuild the United States military. My son is a second lieutenant down at Fort Benning, Georgia, and he starts Ranger School next month. In fact, he has my Ranger tab in his wallet right now, and hopefully we'll pin that on him someday. But when he goes to war, when America's sons and daughters go to war, it should never be a fair fight. And we need to rebuild the military, help the president do that, and I hope the folks of Tennessee will give me that chance to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Kayla, we'll go to you.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you. I first want to just say that it is such an incredible honor to be here again this year with so many of you and to have the opportunity to serve on a panel with such incredible men and women. It really, truly is an honor for a little girl from southern West Virginia. I always tell people I come from a long line of coal miners and moonshiners, so this is a whole new world for me. But I'd like to start off by saying I never in a million years ever thought that I was going to run for office. That wasn't something that I was interested in. I was always the grassroots girl through high school that took my petitions to school for the pro-life movement and tried to get my teachers and students to sign them. I never imagined that I would have the opportunity to represent the state of West Virginia at the level that I do. And in 2014, I was approached to run for the House of Delegates, and I got involved in politics by way of the pro-life movement. I had joined the pro-life groups in school, and I was the teen president of my local Right to Life movement. I won by default, so it's not any big deal. I was the only person that ran. I was the president of myself. And so I got involved that way, and I was approached to run for office in 2014. For the 86 years prior to that, the Democratic Party had maintained control of the West Virginia State Legislature in both houses. And in 2014, the Republican Party really tried to make a push to take control of our state legislature. And I'll be totally honest, I was absolutely reluctant. I initially told them no on multiple occasions. And I decided, as Representative Bachman was talking about earlier, to start praying, and I went on a 3-day fast. And on the second day of that fast, the Lord really opened my eyes, and I turned my radio on, and a song came on that said, "Just a boy with a sling and a stone, but the heart of a lion dared him to go." And immediately I knew that the Lord was convicting me to run. I was still reluctant, still nervous, kept praying about it. And I opened the scripture that evening, and I read in Ezekiel chapter 22. And in that chapter, it talks about all of the immorality that was facing the nation of Israel. And when you go to, I think it's verse 30, it says that the Lord was looking for someone to stand in the gap, but he found no one. And I decided that I did not want to be the reason that God looked at America, that God looked at West Virginia and said, I could find no one. And I decided to give it a shot and run. I ran in a district that had not elected a Republican since the 1920s and won by 83 votes. And so it was very close. But that's sort of, I never imagined that I would run, but I had the opportunity and decided to be obedient, and the Lord paved the way. And not only did he open the door, but he had to kind of push me through it. So
There we go. Dr. Harris.
Well, let me just first of all say thank you for the invitation to be here, and I too find it a real honor to be on the panel with this distinguished group here today. And thank you to all of you that are a part of this summit, because it is so critical what is going to come out of this weekend that happens here. God's timing is always perfect, and I think we all have to look back at our lives, and we can see that with 2020 vision, it seems, and his hand, how he guides us each step of the way. I've been a pastor for 30 years, and it's been interesting because we have seen God do incredible things, bless us in ways beyond anything my wife and I ever hoped or imagined, and we are so thankful for all that God has done. And I had, as Brent mentioned in the introduction, had stepped in to serve as president of the North Carolina Baptist State Convention in 2011, late 2011 and 2012, which coincided with the marriage amendment that was being voted on in North Carolina. And God really began to burden my heart about the importance of stepping up and doing something and helping lead that effort. And it became very apparent to me throughout that process that something was changing quickly in our culture and society, something that needed attention. Well, I finished the marriage amendment battle there in May, and we passed it in North Carolina, 61% to 39%. I received an invitation to come to Watchmen on the Wall for the first time with the Family Research Council, and I came to Washington. I spoke for about 35 minutes at a luncheon during that Watchmen on the Wall, but it was what I walked away from over those 3 days of that conference that was far deeper and far more important than what I could share in those 35 minutes. You see, God began to burden my heart then and there that as spiritual leaders and pastors, that we had a serious responsibility in our society and in our culture. We needed to stand on truth, and we needed to stand and speak for truth. And we needed to be on the front lines. And I couldn't ask people to do something that I wasn't willing to do myself. And so as God began to work in all of that and began to burden my heart, all the timing began to come back together. You see, when I was a 14-year-old boy, my mom and dad dropped me off at the Americans for Reagan office that had been established by Jesse Helms in 1980 in Winston-Salem. And it was during those years as a 14-year-old boy, I walked away with, just on my heart and mind, that Reagan said 3 things were so needed in building a strong nation. You needed a strong domestic agenda, you needed a strong foreign policy, and you needed to be strong on the social issues. In fact, he compared it to a 3-legged stool. And he said, if you try to break off one of those legs, that stool cannot stand. And you see, I just became convinced as I saw our nation changing in 2012 and 2013 at a more rapid pace that it was time to step up and do something. And God has opened the door. I ran in 2016 and lost in the primary by 134 votes that night. My wife and I looked at each other and knew that we had a major decision to make. So 1 year later, after praying together, seeking God's will, I announced that I was stepping aside as pastor of First Baptist Church, Charlotte, to run for the U.S. House of Representatives in the 9th Congressional District. And last May, we won the primary and are now moving into the general election this fall.
Thank you. My next question for you all is looking at this year, 2018. What is at stake this year? And I really appreciate the variety of backgrounds we have. We have Dr. Harris and Senator Green both running for federal office. We have Senator Green, who's a current state legislator, as well as Kayla, current state legislator, and then Elizabeth, who's on the school board, and then different backgrounds. We have a background of Dr. Harris as a pastor in the military and all of these different things. So that being said, I'd like to ask each of you this, and again, starting with you, Elizabeth. What do you see as a top issue facing our country right now, and why is it so important that all of us not wait to get involved, but get involved right now?
I'm really glad for that question because it really is, as some of my fellow panelists have brought up, we are at a crossroads on values, on what is the fundamental fabric of what it feels like to be an American. I'm not even sure that some of the people that are running for office even really want the America that I grew up in. I'm a daughter of a surface naval warfare officer for a career, lived on Pacific coast in San Diego when he served. Our family really served with my father in an entire way. It was deeply embedded in us. I grew up in a Reagan era. I had gas lines. I remember we were very lucky that we had an even and an odd license plate, and so that we'd only have to wait, in a 1.5 mile line instead of a much longer line. And that essence is what's eroding. My oldest son is a college graduate and an Eagle Scout. My second son's in college, he's an Eagle Scout. My third son is a senior in high school, an Eagle Scout. And I have a son who's turning 11 in January. What do? What does my husband, who's an Eagle Scout, do? How do we pass on that tradition? In just the time between my oldest son and my youngest son, we see the destruction of another iconic group in this country. And the bottom line is that when is the time to fight? Because I think we've passed it. I think we've passed the call. The hearken is to every heart to decide that if you want to preserve the liberty that you have lived under, if you want to preserve the fabric, if you believe that there is a right to religious liberty, to religious freedom, to the right to go to a public school of your choice, this is the time. And it is local, a school board issue is local, but that is the nexus of tax policy, housing policy, immigration policy. We're struggling with an open border issue at every single school district across the United States of America. This is affecting every single community. It is affecting every single taxpayer in how we approach. Are we teaching our children now, as my school board has just passed this year, that life equals a birth, gender, where now we're going to assign a sex at birth? I don't understand how we teach a child in family life that sex is assigned at birth, and then what happens in a biology class. So every single one of these issues are tied together, from your local government to your state government to, of course, your federal candidates. But the time is now, the call is on, and every single person who thinks that they can wait until the next presidential election in order to hear their voice heard, that is too late, my friends. It is too late. You have to make them heard this midterm.
So as I understood the question, Brent, it's what's at stake, and I'll echo some of what Elizabeth has said, but our conservative agenda is clearly at stake. We want smaller government, we want less taxes, we want less regulations, we want a stronger military, we want religious freedom, and it is at stake. And it boils down to freedom itself. I mean, freedom, as the Democrats move more and more towards socialism, freedom itself is at stake. That's what we're fighting for. Here's a thought for you. If the Democrats win the House, Maxine Waters will be the chairman of financial services. That ought to motivate all of us, right, to get out and knock a few doors and write a few checks. But it's even bigger than that. It's really threats to the foundation of our country. Why is this Supreme Court fight now the biggest fight in Washington, D.C.? It's because of this idea of a living Constitution. That the Constitution can be interpreted by these justices by what they think it ought to say, which is absolutely wrong. And when they do that, they undo the separation of powers by negating the legislative branch and the voice of the people. We must stand against that. That is at stake. The foundation, the separation of powers that makes our country so great is at stake right now. And so we've got to get out there and work very hard to stop this destructive anti-freedom agenda of the left. Thank you.
It's always hard to go last or next to last when you have people who have a lot of the same ideas and thoughts as you, but they're absolutely correct. America as we know it is at stake, right? So for the last 8 years, we saw such a push to humiliate the conservatives, to humiliate Christian conservatives publicly by the presidential administration. Now we have a president who is fighting for America. We have a president who has delivered on his promises to appoint conservative and pro-life justices. We have a president who has delivered on ensuring that all Americans have the ability to pay their taxes at a non-exorbitant rate. And that's what is at stake. I always tell people that there are really 3 issues that believers should base their vote on. The first is our religious freedom. The Lord is God is the author of religious freedom, right? He never pushes faith. He never pushes Christianity on anybody. He gives us our religious freedom, and we can, and if He gives it to us, government can't take it away. The second issue that believers have to consider when they're voting is the issue of the right to life. From Genesis to Revelation, Scripture talks about the sanctity of life and how innocent blood cries out to God for vengeance when it's shed. And we are to be those watchmen on the wall. We are to be those men that stand in the gap, those women that stand in the gap for the unborn. The third issue that is at stake, and that is one of the most important issues that we as believers need to consider when we are voting, and it is the appointment of judges. Throughout American history, if you look at it, it wasn't Congress that said abortion was legal. It wasn't Congress that redefined what marriage was. It was the Supreme Court that ruled unilaterally what we were going to define as right, as morally right and morally wrong. What we see right now is a push to take the things that God has established as sacred, and we have made them disposable. We've taken life, we've taken marriage, and we've thrown those out, and we've taken these sacred values and we've made them disposable. And that is what is at stake. We have leaders that want to impeach the president. And if we are not on our guard, if we are not active now, if not now, then when? If not you, then who? It's time to be active because so much of what we believe is at stake in these midterm elections.
Well, I certainly echo what all of our panelists have said here. And just to put it in terms, when I'm asked on the campaign trail, really what's at stake in this election, I've kind of coined a phrase that this is a direction election. This is an election that will set the direction for our country. I think every one of us in this room, to a great degree, understood in September and October of 2016, there was a weight that people seemed to feel. You could literally feel it. It was almost a weight that we carried on our chest, a weight that we carried on our heart, a burden. I remember traveling to a number of states and speaking to pastors in different states, about 6 of them, of the importance of the election and getting folks registered to vote. And I was so amazed at the number of prayer meetings that were just breaking out all over the country in that fall of 2016 because we felt the weight and the burden of that election. And many of us believe that God granted us as a nation a reprieve, a window of opportunity to get things right. And the truth of the matter is, ladies and gentlemen, where we may have felt that 2016 really was the most important election in our lifetime, and that phrase has been used and at times maybe overused, but if you really believe that about 2016, and I think many of us in this room did, you have to understand that the election of 2018 is the most important midterm ever in our lifetime, because what's at stake? When you get down to it, it is a direction election. Are we going to continue to move in the direction that we are moving now, with an economy that is booming, a 4.2% GDP growth, when we were told in the previous administration that the new normal was maybe 1 or 2%? Are we going to continue to move in the direction of tax cuts that we've been promised by the other side will be repealed? Are we going to continue with the direction in rolling back regulations that have opened up businesses and opened up banks again for money to flow, for new companies to get started and people going back to work? Is that the direction we're going to maintain, or are we going to choose the other direction that is going to threaten all of that? A direction that wants to repeal your tax cuts and our corporate tax cut. The direction that wants to put those regulations back in place, and they've vowed to do so. Listen, we are living indeed at the moment in time that this is the most important midterm of our lifetime, because it's setting the direction of our nation. And we've got to take it just that seriously over these next 6.5 weeks.
Thank you. We have a few minutes left, so one more question for each of the panelists. I know there's a lot of people watching in the audience, watching online, and I think all of us at one time or another are asking ourselves a couple questions. We're asking ourselves, can my one voice actually make a difference? You've outlined the problem, what's at stake. Can my one voice actually impact all of this, and how? So if you all could take just a couple of minutes and answer that from your perspective, what would you tell that person? Can they make a difference? And maybe what are some practical ways that they could get involved?
So there's no doubt in my mind that one person can make a difference. I serve on a board that is deeply fractured and not in my favor. And sometimes having just that one voice and standing for truth. And one of the things that's interesting when I listen to my fellow panelists, this issue of the rule of law and this issue of being able to be the voice that says what is truth. Because what we're watching unfold on a national stage is truth is on trial. The very phrase and what the meaning is behind truth is being messaged to children. It is being messaged to voters. It is being messaged to boys that you can be found to be guilty just because somebody says you are, and then we have now reversed the rule of law. And if one person is there to say, we're not going to do this policy, or we're going to listen to someone else. I had 1,000 speakers or 1,000 comments come in on the issue of the family life definition of birth and sex assigned at birth, and you have an entire board that votes against it. However, what that does is that wakes people up to the fact that someone is telling a lie, they're selling it to us as propaganda, and they want us to repeat it back as truth. And no longer are we in a position where we can tolerate that. An individual voice in a capacity of a voter, in a capacity of somebody that you can talk to compel somebody else to come out and vote who wouldn't normally vote, in a capacity to decide to become a candidate, is injecting yourself into the stream. And by that very virtue of you being there, by that very virtue of you standing and saying, I'm going to represent parents. I am going to represent children. I am going to represent the rule of law, liberty, religious liberty. I'm going to hold fast. I am not going to waver. I'm not going to rubber stamp. I am no longer allowing the charade to continue of the shell game of truth that moves in from this lies, propaganda, truth proposition. We are responsible to hold our local officials accountable, our state officials accountable, and our federal officials accountable. But we can't hold them accountable if we don't elect them. If we don't elect them. And the time has come to say we're going to put people into office and hold them accountable to a basic set of values that represent where we are from a position of faith and where we are as a nation, that Constitution actually means something. And so it is absolutely clear to me that a single voice, whether on or in an elected role, or as a voter, or as an activist in your community, as a person of faith, can move mountains.
Can one person make a difference? I'm an ER physician, and I can tell you that one person can save a life. And I believe that one vote can save a nation. I believe that at the deepest part of my soul. What can each of you do to help this great country? Well, first, you could pray. Because it is a war between two sides. One side that sees that there's a fixed moral right and wrong, and we attribute that to a belief in a creator, and a side that sees morality as relative, that they can decide what's right and wrong, and they get to decide. Isn't it interesting that those who believe in moral relativism can find a way to be morally indignant? I just find that to be a bit odd. But so first off, we've got to pray for our country and pray for our leaders. But you know, I knock doors as I'm running for office, and I come across these individuals, and they say to me, you know, you're the first politician that's ever knocked on my door, which is kind of crazy. And that means that one person knocking on doors, getting that voter contact, can make a difference. So volunteer for elected officials. Go out there and knock doors. Make phone calls. There is lots of stuff you can do. One of the things that the other side does very, very well is social media. So if I could ask you, be involved on social media. We need to not abandon that space just because there are vile things that are offensive to us on those social media platforms. Please be involved. Look us up. I'm Dr. Mark Green. Find me on Facebook and follow us and help us get the message out. That's something else that you can do, and one person can absolutely make a difference. And you're making a difference by being here today. Thank you.
When you look throughout history, it's made up of decisions and policies that one person often have made. If you look at the abolition of the slave trade, men like William Wilberforce, who on his own decided that he was going to fight the social norm and he was going to do what was right, he made a difference as an individual. Men like Dietrich Bonhoeffer made a difference as an individual. You think about Daniel. I met Jack Phillips earlier today, and Jack Phillips reminded me so much of Daniel in Scripture, because Daniel stood for something when it wasn't popular. When his government told him that he couldn't do something, he said, I serve a God that is bigger than you. And he was willing to go out and do whatever it took, just like Jack Phillips was. Had they not made those decisions, we wouldn't know their names today. And it is so important that each of us realize our individual power. And this is one of my favorite questions, because the thing that bothers me more than anything in this world is apathy. And I think all too often we get comfortable. Things are good for us right now in America. We've got more money in our pockets. We've got a president who cares about us. And it's easy to sit at our homes or in our pews at church and pretend like everything is cupcakes and butterflies outside, and it's not. It's not. If we continue to sit in our pews and do nothing, then we are going to give our country away. These elections aren't about us. It's not about our individual elections. This is about a country that we love. And there are so many ways that you can get involved. You know, Family Research Council is doing phenomenal things. If they didn't ask me to say this, but if you have the means to do so, you need to be contributing to this organization. Because they are working so hard for your values, and they are doing a great job of doing it. Get involved with your state family policy councils. You all have local and statewide representatives that are running in your areas. If you have the ability, donate to their campaigns. If you have 5 minutes, call your friends, make sure they show up. If you have the ability to do it, go knock doors. There's no reason that you can't be engaged, that you can't be involved. There are so many ways to get involved. Reach out to your candidates. And you know what? Maybe you're like me and you're grassroots, you want to support candidates you never in a million years thought you would run, but maybe it's time you start looking in the mirror and asking yourself, if nobody else is going to do it, should I?
Well, let me just say, in answer to the question, you're talking to somebody here who's lost an election by 134 votes. So can one person make a difference? There's 210 precincts that make up the congressional district of the 9th that I'm running in North Carolina. So less than one vote per precinct is what we lost an election by. Had one person more gone in each of those 210, we would have won back in 2016. My point being that yes, every single one of us can make a difference and is extremely important. And what can you do? I want to just say a word here in closing about what you can do that oftentimes is overlooked, particularly among conservatives. We've got to understand the principle of giving once again to political causes and giving to organizations that Kayla mentioned, Family Research Council is one, but giving to candidates. One of the biggest tragedies in this country is we are quickly, I mean quickly, coming to a place where an individual like myself, who has been a pastor for 30 years, who's made a decent salary, has been able to raise a family, could not run for office and be successful because I'm not independently wealthy. And we have got to restore to our nation the ability of individuals to be able to step up and answer that call and run for office and be successful. And that's only going to happen when all of us are willing to step up and give and support candidates in the work that they are doing. We all hate it. We hate the fundraising. We hate the amount of money that's involved in politics. But I'm telling you something, it's time for us to step up and make sacrifices at every level in order to get this job done. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate the input of all of our panelists here. Please join me in thanking them for their participation today.
Change the world.